we're giving everybody a minute to log in. So webinar, before we actually start the webinar, number one is you will all receive a copy of a PowerPoint as well as the recording of the webinar. If you have any questions that you can submit on Zoom, you can use the Q&A button or the chat button, and we'll be monitoring that and feeding them to the presenter as we go. Lastly, there's a brief 4-question survey that you should be receiving to give us some feedback on how well we did with this webinar. So my name is Ed Cook. I am a Canton SCORE volunteer. I've been a volunteer for about 10 years and used to work for PepsiCo. But SCORE is a national nonprofit organization that began back in 1964. It spread pretty rapidly. We currently have about 225 chapters and over 11,000 volunteers like myself. Locally, we're funded by the Stark Community Foundation, the Greater Canton Chamber of Commerce, and through the federal government. Besides sponsoring educational workshops like this that will benefit small business owners, we counsel small businesses. Our tagline is actually America's Counselors to Small Businesses. We counsel for free. It's confidential. Whether you have a startup or an existing business that's having some issues, for-profit, nonprofit, we counsel everybody. So if you are a small business owner or work for a small business and you feel that things could be better, we can help with that. Locally, we have about 47 counselors, and they each have a very unique skill set from a business perspective. If you're having marketing problems, we have counselors that work for very large companies in the marketing area and banking and what have you. So our office is located in the Jackson Township Administrative Building, although we will meet when and wherever our clients need us. And you should see a QM code there on the screen if you want to reach out to us. So there's our email, our website, as well as our phone number. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ken Crumich, who is our presenter today. And Ken, I'm just going to turn it over to you. So on with the show.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Today's topic is succession planning for business. And what I'm going to be presenting is particularly a strategic approach to this topic. My background is that I am a degreed chemical engineer and spent a little bit of time being an engineer in my career, but then moved over to the business side and spent the remainder of my career in business. I started in direct sales and then had the opportunity, as time went on, to run several small businesses. And in all cases, they were part of larger corporations, but they were all fairly autonomous. Now, I'm going to draw on that experience as we go through this topic, and I'll be telling you about successes as well as failures that I had. So the outline of today's discussion is we're going to go through the learning goals, and then we're going to talk about why those goals are important to know. I'll cover some background, some statistics around this topic, but also some common mistakes that are made in succession planning that I've made, I've seen others make, and so forth. We will use a case history from my career to illustrate the 5 process steps that we're going to go through. Now, I'll tell you up front that this case history was a success, but you only need to look at the list of common mistakes in a few slides to understand all of my failures. It took a long time before I got to a success, but I'm using a successful one because it illustrates the steps pretty clearly that I'm trying to suggest to you all to use in your succession planning. Now I'm going to be asking you some questions, and hopefully you ask me questions. But how that all gets done, I'm going to ask Professor Gomez if she'll take over here and talk to us all about how it is we're going to handle questions in the next hour or so.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. So very quickly, I am going to be handling your questions. So there's several ways that you can do it, as Ed mentioned. There is an option below at the bottom of your screen of Q&A, so you can post a question there. There's also the chat down below as well. If you want to pose your question there as well, that's also possible. I am going to be monitoring your questions, and I'll bring them up to Ken when I see it's the appropriate time to do so. But you can also raise your hand, also an option at the bottom of your screen if you want to directly address Ken and ask a question or answer one of the questions that he makes. Again, I'll be calling up and making him aware that there are questions by our attendees. And so that's how we're going to manage it.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so let's go to the first slide, which is learning goals. The first goal that I would like you to take away from this session is that succession planning truly is strategic in nature. The second is planning's essential. You have to get ahead of the process if you're going to do it effectively. And then finally, you need to apply a deliberate process. That deliberate process avoids the common mistakes that we'll talk about in a moment. But just as importantly, what it does is it actually builds a case for you to justify the candidate and the skill set you want to hire and the candidate you want to choose. And it really does facilitate, this process really facilitates the steps associated with getting to a successful candidate. So now, here's my first question to all of you. Why do you think I'm saying that succession planning is strategic? I'll wait a few minutes here to see if there's anybody who wants to take a shot at that. Any takers? Come on, y'all can't be that shy, huh?
So one of our participants answers, we have to plan an exit strategy to get out of the business.
Okay, so relative to succession planning is really important when you are considering an exit. So when you're exiting a business, you're starting pretty far ahead. So it's strategic in the nature of you are trying to tee yourself up a long time in advance of actually making the decision to exit the business. So it's long-term in nature. That's why succession, and it also helps you give yourself plenty of time to train that successor so that they really understand the mechanics of the business before you exit. So that's coming at it from a very interesting perspective. If you're in, go ahead. Are there any other?
Yes, a few more answers. There has to be a plan. And if you want your business to follow along with your philosophy, without a plan, you will fail. And you have to be able to choose the correct person.
Wow, those are all great answers. They are really spot on. The only thing that I would add at this stage is that, strategy typically happens at kind of a higher level than where the position exists. And when you do succession planning, it's a real opportunity to align the position itself with what the business strategy is. And in fact, we'll dive into that in detail here in a moment as we go through it. So great participation. Thanks, everybody. So let's look a little bit of background right now. In 2021, turnover rates, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, was 47%. That means that whether it was from retiring, firing, downsizing, or just flat out quitting the jobs and going to another job, was at a rate of 47%. Now, I'll tell you that over half of that number, because I dug into the details, over half of that number came from a standpoint of job dissatisfaction, people leaving. And you could say that 2021 is not a representative year because, we had a lot going on with the pandemic and all that sort of stuff. But in prior years, it wasn't that much different. So all along, what's been happening is that turnover rates have been increasing. And of course, technology is facilitating that. Job visibility is out there. Companies haven't done themselves any favors with regards to how they treat employees at times. So there's a whole lot of dynamics that are causing this to happen. And most companies target 10 to 20%. But even think about it. You're gonna hire someone with a 1 in 10 chance that they're going to leave, or 2 in 10 chance they're going to leave. That's a terrible waste. So from a background perspective, succession planning is really important because it helps the employees that are in the company move up, and it provides opportunities all along the line as far as trying to retain good employees. Now, another piece of background here is, I'll call them my common mistakes, but I've seen them repeated by many others. The first is a lack of knowledge. People tend to approach succession planning by just finding somebody to drop into the position as is. Find me a warm body as fast as you can get them. That's a terrible strategic approach to succession planning. But it derives from the fact that people aren't taking the time to really understand how the position adds value within the position, within the business unit, and within higher, larger corporate structures that might be above the business unit. So that's one very common mistake. They don't take the time to think. The second is lack of objectivity. This I call the sort of the clown prince syndrome here. There's a favorite that has been sort of ridden the coattails of one manager or another. That manager just says, I'm going to pull that person along, they're going to take my position. When in fact, they could be very, very bad at doing that job. And so they get into it and they fail. Poor planning, not getting ahead. A number of folks have mentioned that already. And all of this just leads to a very bad skill mismatch between the successor and what the position really needs. You get poor performance. You end up with spending a lot of time trying to train them, and sometimes you have to start all over again. So it's a lost opportunity, and that translates to a financial impact. So now, let's tee this whole series of steps up by talking about the case history that I mentioned. What the case was that I wanted to hire a manufacturing director for the business. And I wanted to do succession planning for that manufacturing director. Now, at the point in time, I had a manufacturing director. I wasn't going to lose that individual's capabilities, but it was clear, as you'll see, that we needed to consider somebody with a different skill set. And so I was doing succession planning for a person and a position that was in the organization. And the organization was a small, relatively independent unit of a larger company. Our products were proprietary and commodity. We did a lot of services for our customers, engineering design. We did the manufacturing in a large manufacturing floor. We did on-site installation at the customer's location. We dealt with industrial markets, but we were very much North America based. Our customers were all in North America at the time that I came into the company. Now, I was asked to come in and lead the turnaround of this company. And at the point in time that we were looking to hire a director, we had done major restructuring. We sold off a very loss leading kind of division of the company and done major restructuring. Got to a point where we had new products that had just been introduced, had not been ramped up. We had our first international project under our belt, and we had gotten to break even financials from a 15% loss position at the start of all this. But we were headed in a new direction at this point. We had a new strategy at the business level to grow. We were going to grow the new products and grow internationally. We were also part of a larger company. So we had a culture within that larger company that said, promote from within anytime you can do it. But if not possible, definitely hire people that could grow into bigger roles. Hire people with potential. So that's part of the background. The other part was that the position was a manufacturing director. Reported to me at the time, I had several other staff members. And then, well, relative to the position, the metrics for the position as it was defined at that time were typical manufacturing metrics: quality, delivery, cost control, effective people management. There were several others. And the individual that was in the role had good quality performance and had strong technical skills. And the two of them went together. His technical skills, which we didn't want to lose to the organization, were very strong from the standpoint of producing high quality product. It was great. However, on the negative side, this individual had very poor on-time performance, which had ramifications we'll talk about. And that on-time performance applied both to product shipments as well as to major projects that had to get done within the manufacturing organization. And then there was the poor people management side of it. This individual was great at doing, but not very good at leading. So he did the job of his staff instead of letting his staff do it. He lost sight of cost control, both on the product and within the organization. So there were some positives and some negatives about this individual that led us to the point of considering a succession plan. We wanted to fill the position in 3 months. And the other provision that we had to deal with was that in all likelihood, I was going to be moving on in a few years. So anyone we hired, we wanted to have some potential to move up in 1 to 2 years. We had a big ticket to fill here. But now I'm going to go through the process steps and get us into the nuts and bolts of how it is I recommend that you approach this topic. The first is establish goals for the succession. What do you want to get out of this at the end of the day? How do you want to measure yourself and measure success when you pick a successor? The second step is determine the baseline position value. And that's either the opportunity being created or lost for the current position as defined and the current individual that's in that job. So it's sort of, where are you today? The state of the state. The next step is, how do you make it better? How do you enhance it? And then the next step is really, what are you trying to gain here in terms of a successor? What selection criteria do you have for the candidate that's going to create the best value in that position? And if you've been smart in steps 1, 2, and 3, you've been checking yourself and saying, really, what skills am I going to need to make up for any deficiencies in the position or enhance the value of the position and meet the goals? So by the time you get to step 4, you're usually got a pretty good idea of how you're going to write that position description and what skills you're really looking for in the best candidate. And then the last step is implementing the succession. I'm going to spend less time on that 5th step because it's more the nuts and bolts of posting the job and recruiting and interviewing and so forth, which I felt, okay, that's the nuts and bolts. I'm not going to try to go into those weeds today. Now, the way I'm going to approach this is that I'm going to show the step in a general sense that could be applied in any situation. And then I'm going to apply it on the next slide to our case history. And at the end of this presentation, you're going to get a full-blown, complete handout, as Ed mentioned, and it'll have all the slides I'm presenting today, including my presentation notes. So let's move on and talk about goals. At the goal step, I want you to consider it from 3 different perspectives. Those perspectives are from the position itself, just a very narrow view relative to the position. And then I want you to step up into the more strategic level of thinking and consider whether or not anything going on at the business unit level, its strategy and so forth, actually create a goal that you want to accomplish in the position that you're trying to fill. So you'll cover it from the position perspective, from the business perspective, and then from a more higher level, if you have a higher level corporation imposing anything on you, you would want then to incorporate those. So those are the 3 positions. So if you look at for the position being filled, you have to ask yourself, what are the metrics right now? And how well are they being met? And what's your goal? Well, it's pretty obvious, given that no one's perfect in a role. You would like to have improved performance one way or the other relative to the position as it's described. And of course, you're going to have timing goals. How soon do you want to get it done? Now, frequently, as I said, people stop here. They just want to find somebody that'll meet the same specs on the position as it was before, and that's it. They just want to drop it in. And that's fine. You can do that, but you're missing an opportunity if you do. So let's go to the business unit level, where the position resides. Here you have to ask yourself, really, what is the strategy for the business? Where's it going? Its vision, its goals, its purpose, its tactics, a lot of buzzwords around that word strategy. But you really have to ask yourself about the position and how the position relates to those items as you consider the goals. You also have to ask yourself, hey, has the strategy changed since the original position description was written? And frequently it has. So that then creates new opportunity for you to set a goal for the position that is different than what had been before. So you want the goal to relate to how the successor can impact the business strategy. And then finally, corporations have all sorts of initiatives that they require their business units to kind of adhere to. That frequently drives a goal that you'll want to consider in your succession planning. So now you've got 3 sources of goals, and let's see how that applies to the base case or to the case history that I just laid out. So we'll start with the position goals. For the position being filled, as I mentioned, the individual was underperforming the current metrics that we had, particularly in the area of delivery, in on-time project management, in cost management, people management, and the ability to, almost the inability to get out of the weeds and come up to a higher level and think about how the manufacturing direction can support the business. So there were a number of negatives there. So basically, we came up with a goal relative to the position that within 3 months, we wanted to hire an individual who could improve delivery, people management, and cost control, but not sacrifice quality in making that happen. We had good quality, we didn't want to lose it. So that's the approach we took at the position level. Now let's look at the strategic level, the business level. What's the goal? So now here's your second question. For this case history, what had been the business strategy and how has it changed? So I'll give you a chance to take a shot at that. Anybody remember?
So I have one answer: simply survive the first year as a goal.
Repeat that, would you please?
Simply survive the first year.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. We were in, I'll tell you, initially we were in total firefighting mode, you know. So that's what the strategy was, you know, just, you know, I used to use the expression stop the bleeding, which was kind of like an ER analogy. We had to do things quickly and we had to get them done pretty quick and get things into a stable condition. But how's it changed? How has it changed going forward? Do you remember what the new strategy was on the background for the case study? Where were we going next? Okay, so the answer is we were turning our focus after we got to break even towards growth. We wanted to grow in the new product area and we wanted to grow internationally. So that's how, from a business perspective, we had a new set of requirements for the position. We had to hire an individual who could think more at the strategy level and really contribute to the growth strategy. Now we'll flesh this out in terms of what that actually means in a minute. But at this point, we did a gut check. What skills do we need? Well, at this point, I said, well, okay, I really want somebody that can juggle a lot of balls, can deal with the fact that things are not certain, and I needed somebody who was good with critical thinking. And I needed somebody who was innovative. How are you going to respond to these different customer demands that we're dealing with, these different product demands we're dealing with? So I kind of took a shot at the skill set at that stage. And that's fine at this stage. But I wanted to hire an individual who could contribute to the growth strategy. And we'll detail this out in a minute as to what that means. So now we had cultural goals as well. We wanted to hire an individual with the potential to be the president in several years, okay? He would have been one of three or four staff members that I had at the time, all of which could be potential candidates, but I didn't want to miss an opportunity to hire somebody so that my candidate pool for potential promotion was bigger, okay? So we had a big job to fill. And by the way, it was going to cost us money. We were going to have to pay to find an individual that could meet these goals. So we recognized that up front. Okay, so now let's go to the second step. And this second step, if you recall, is all about trying to say, what have you got right now? Create the base case before you go to considering all the goals and all the added value that you're trying to get. So you basically want to look at what is the current value being created by the individual or not being created by the individual in the position today with the current metrics, no change. Okay, so good metrics equal positive value. Poor metrics equal negative value. And then what I want to challenge you to do is actually estimate the economic impact of that level of performance. And we'll walk through that in a moment. So this second step is really, where are you right now? If the performance is great, that's fantastic. If it's not great, what's it costing you? Because that's opportunity. That's opportunity for you to improve. And of course, now you also have to consider what skill set you need. And when you understand what positive value and negative value you're getting, you can start to think about, I need somebody who's maybe quite a bit better in one area or another. So is there going to be a higher emphasis on one skill set versus another, given this analysis that you've done so far? And then what I'm hoping is that this starts your thinking regarding the skills needed and actually starts the process of creating a business case for the revised position description. Now, if you're in a job right now, you ought to look at your own job this way. How are you creating value in the base, just relative to the position? And in the next step, we'll talk about how you create value at a higher level. But you can use this on your own job, and you may not like the answer. In some cases you will, but in other cases you'll go, am I really adding value in the job? Okay, so now let's take our case and look at the value. Okay, so the positive value that we mentioned for the existing manufacturing director was great at quality. That led to customer retention. It led to low scrap on the floor. So the product that we produced met quality first time, didn't have to be reworked, didn't have to be scrapped. There was no added cost associated with it. That was great. We didn't want to lose that. But also there was negative value. And when we go down through the estimate, I'll show you what those were. So I want you to do a financial impact of that current performance. This won't be easy. Many times it's really hard to take very general performance attributes and reduce them to economics. But you're in business, whether you're in business for a profit or for nonprofit. In a nonprofit, you're in business to sustain the good charitable mission that you're on. Well, you need to sustain it. And so you need to kind of look at things on a number basis. And it won't be precise, but it's a good way to start looking at the performance. In our case, as I mentioned, the positive value was good quality, low scrap rate. Customers kept us on the bid list of suppliers. That's great. When they needed it, they called us. That was great. On the negative side, however, that delivery issue was costing us. The impact of lost orders was close to 5% of sales. So we would promise too long a delivery. Others would be shorter. So we were at a competitive disadvantage, or we didn't ship on time, all of which customers remembered, and it cost us in terms of sales. Second of all, cost control. We were missing our estimates by 15% of what the product should actually cost. And we had just moved in to a brand spanking new manufacturing facility and had plenty of time to shake the bugs out, but we were still missing the estimates. So we weren't even capturing the efficiency we were looking for. And the impact was that we were losing 10% gross margin. These were big numbers, as you'll see. So that's the base value. We had plenty of opportunity cost that we could capture before we go to the next step. Now, I'll reduce all this to what the numbers were in just a minute. But before we go there, let's go to what the enhanced value potential step is all about. Now, in this step, you basically want to look at something called, the total enhanced value. Now, the total enhanced value is that opportunity cost that we just talked about in the base case. Then added to that is the value of anything that you'll get out of aligning your new hire with the business strategy if it's changed. The value of aligning it to any corporate initiatives. The sum of all of those are actually what is the pot of gold that you have to deal with in this process. And it's the value that you achieve by doing an effective job of succession planning. Now, you can look at this in two ways. You can look at it within the existing organization or an entirely restructured organization. So if we're looking at this from the standpoint of within the existing organization, you want to look at the current position metrics and you want to draw on the previous work that you just did. You want to hire the successor who can produce the good results, eliminate the bad results. You want the best of both worlds. It's not rocket science. When you go to the added value, you want a new position that has metrics in it that's aligned with the revised business unit goals and corporate goals. Now, at this point, I always challenge people to take a hard look at that existing organizational structure, because frequently within that, you might have roles that could be combined. Now, that typically happens a little bit maybe at the first level management position, or you can look at ways of restructuring things to meet the strategy that is makes your organization structure more streamlined. And if you do that, of course, you have an added positive here from the standpoint that you might actually be eliminating a position, but it might cost you more to do it. Now, you have to be careful when you're doing this, because frequently people say, well, let's combine these two positions. And they overload the individual that they want to lead both groups. And before you know it, the whole thing's come apart and failed anyway. So you got to be really careful with how you approach this. And as you know, in our case, we've seen some revised business unit goals and some company goals. So we'll get to that in just a moment. So now it's a good time also to be thinking about skill sets. On each of the steps, 1, 2, and 3, you want to be accumulating the skill sets that you think you're going to need as prompted by each of these steps. Emphasis on some, entirely new skill sets on others. So that's step 3 in general. Let's look at step 3 if you were to restructure the organization. Now, I'm not going to get into this in detail, but when you do, you're basically starting with a clean slate. You typically have, all new possibly all new metrics, expanded roles at the individual level, positions combined, new metrics, and that really drives a new skill set. Now, I'm not going to talk about this in depth right now, but since you are starting with a clean slate, it's a real opportunity for you to say, what are the activities and tasks associated with the role? how does that role connect to the business strategy? And use the same steps of 1, 2, and 3 that I've been talking about here in this circumstance. So now we're at the point where in step 3, we have looked at enhanced value from a number of different perspectives. It's time now to do the valuation, to reduce these general terms to real economic value. And also think in terms of the salary you're going to have to pay this enhanced successor. So let's have a look at that relative to our case. Okay, so in our case, the existing organizational structure did not change. The base value was, simply put, the increased value of on-time performance and good cost control. I limited it to that for the moment. Relative to added value, the new position metrics had to be aligned with this growth strategy. Now, the growth strategy was new products, new customers, and new geographies, all of which presented challenges. And then the other added value was the potential to lead the company in 1 to 2 years. So now I've got a question for you all. If you were me, and I was working closely with other people in our organization, HR and so forth, I really wanted to understand how this position could make an impact on the growth strategy. So what impact does manufacturing have on these new products, these new customers, and these geographies? My question to you is just that. How could the manufacturing director impact the achievement of the growth strategy? Once we know that, we've got a better idea of what we're looking for in a skill set. So, okay, I'll stop now and let you take a shot at trying to formulate an answer to that question.
I haven't received any answer yet. Do you want to ask us the question again, maybe using different words?
Exactly. That's where I was headed. Okay. So you have an organization that's got engineering in it, it's got sales in it, it's got, of course, accounting in it, and it's got manufacturing in it. How does manufacturing as a department affect growth when you're thinking about new products, new customers, and new geographies? Well, can you launch new products without manufacturing? What's the answer to that question?
Cost containment is one of the answers.
Okay.
Another one is that the manufacturing director can help provide some insights as to cheaper materials that could be used, as well as skills from the workers.
Yep.
Commitment to getting the job done.
Absolutely. Okay, so new products. You start with a new product, and of course, you got to make some of it. You got to know what it's going to cost. So you've got new products you have to make. So you have to start with, how am I going to do this? You got to make some prototypes, a lot of which has to happen in the manufacturing organization. You can't launch a product. If you're going to make it, you can't launch a product without manufacturing being intimately involved in it. So if you say my growth is dependent upon new products, you can't do it without manufacturing. And you can't do it without a leader who is willing to take on a project like that and really babysit it, because it takes special handholding. Okay, then you got new customers. One of the answers were connected to that in the sense that you got all these new demands coming from, in our case, international customers. So now you've got new set of demands. I want it packaged this way, not that way. I'm different than North American customers. You got all of this bobbing and weaving to go on if you're going to satisfy that new customer. Then you got to ship it. You got to ship it overseas. Who takes care of that? Again, manufacturing, shipping is always under manufacturing in my experience. So it's pretty clear that this manufacturing director that we were trying to hire better have a skill set that was allowed that individual to accommodate all the new demands that were coming at the organization from a growth perspective. So those tactics wouldn't happen but for manufacturing. Now, it needed sales, obviously, but the market was growing and sales was just a little bit easier at that point in time. Engineering had faced with similar problems, but manufacturing was where, as the expression goes, the rubber meets the road, right there where it all happened. Okay, so at this stage, we thought about skill sets. What do we really need in the way of skill sets to satisfy this growth strategy and to potentially be in the president's slot? Well, I'll answer my question here. We really needed somebody who was adaptive to change. Okay, really needed somebody that could really deal with all this new information coming at them and find a way to get it done, as somebody mentioned. But I really wanted at this point to go through how we valued this enhanced successor that we were trying to hire. Well, in terms of the base case, 5% of sales increase and a 10% gross margin increase. That's a big deal. A really big deal. It meant $900,000 a year impact on the bottom line, which was a huge impact on the small company that we were running at the time. The growth strategy, we saw the market and could see what the drivers were, and we're pretty sure that we were positioned to double our revenue in 5 to 10 years. And so we just got done talking about how manufacturing impacted it. And I said to myself, well, we didn't have a good manufacturing manager, we would be in a tough position. But that director I considered to be one of the 3 key positions that impacted growth, and it had a 50% impact on the success. So if we didn't double, we were only going to hit 50% growth. So that was a big number. So we got $900,000. We got a big impact on growth. And then there was the potential to grow into the president's job. And there, if they grow, they've learned the business. You save some recruitment expense. You change a lot of the ramp up time if you were to hire a new leader for the organization. So you get a lot of benefit from the standpoint of value that you create if you satisfy the 3 goals that we mentioned. But we were going to have to pay 20% above the market salary of a basic manufacturing director, 20% more than we were paying the individual that was in there. And so that was going to be a $30,000 premium a year. So did we have a business case? You bet we did. $30,000 was a small amount of money to be paying for this high level of potential. Now, you may say to yourself, this is unrealistic. Well, heck, if it were half that, we still would have gone for it. A quarter of that, we still would have gone for it. What I'm trying to emphasize is try to do some numbers around it, because it really cements your thinking as to how hard you want to look for an individual that will satisfy all these requirements. But as I mentioned, made a lot of mistakes. I had done a turnaround before this, did not follow this process, and the company really paid for it. So we're on to step 4 now. You're at the point where you really want to decide what is your selection criteria for the position. What are the things you're looking for, and how do you want to write this position description before you go out and post it? You've got 3 sources of skill sets. You're going to try to prioritize some of them, and you'll have some sense of the salary range for the position. If not, you need to work with each HR and say, if I had to hire this individual out there, what's it going to cost me? So in our case, the skill sets we were looking for were basic manufacturing skills and experience. You know, we didn't want to hire somebody that had never been in manufacturing. I wanted somebody that was familiar with scheduling, labor management, basic operations in terms of process steps that needed to be performed in a certain cadence to produce the quality and so forth. But I prioritized a skill which I distilled down to sense of urgency in terms of delivery improvement, both on the product and on the product improvement and on projects that were going to be placed on manufacturing shoulders, like new products, okay? I wanted better economic thinking, cost control, in terms of not only the labor it costs, but the materials, as somebody mentioned, but also cost control relative to the individual staff, making it the organization more efficient and delegating. From a business unit perspective, we wanted skill sets that revolved around being adaptive to change. The changes of product range, the changes of customer scope, the changes of geography. From a company perspective, we wanted basic leadership skills, decisiveness, critical thinking, and wanted somebody who was an influencer. You know, as one of 3 key positions in my staff, a good read of leadership potential for me is whether or not they can effectively influence those around them when those individuals don't report to them. So I categorize that as an influencer. So now I had a good set of skills that I wanted to incorporate into the position statement along the lines of the successful candidate will have these qualities. And so it helped me really go to the next step in terms of implementing the succession plan. So we wrote the position description. We tailored all our interview questions to really flesh out whether the individual had the prioritized skills and experience we were looking for. It's a great tool. You positioned yourself to say, oh, I got to write a question around this skill set or that skill set. And then we went about the recruiting process. Now, the recruiting process has evolved over time. Today, it is very, very software driven. There are all these sites out there that you can post jobs on. You get a lot of responses. There's a screening step to be done. But my pet peeve today in today's systems is that hiring authorities allow the software to make the choices for them. They put a selection criteria out there that, when matched up with a resume, ends up feeding you a handful of candidates, and that's all you have to choose from. Well, in that event, what you're really doing is hiring people that are pretty good at writing their resume to match the position description that you posted. They pick out all the buzzwords out of the position description and put it in their resume, and the computer goes, oh, I see that word. I'm going to filter this person and let them through. If your resume doesn't have those buzzwords, the software doesn't pick it. So what I'm strongly encouraging hiring authorities to do as you consider candidates is that you really look hard at much more of the resumes than the software would produce for you. And maybe you just ask HR if they can tweak the software so that it makes a bigger funnel. Is it going to take more time? You bet it is. But you're going to find better people. You invest in this, you're investing in the strategic approach. You're planning. If you've done your job planning, you've got a little bit more time to work with. And at the end of the day, you're going to achieve this. You're going to have a succession planning process that is strategic. You would have thought earlier. You would have avoided common mistakes. You would have a great business case to justify this position to your boss. And hopefully, you walk away today with a different concept about succession planning. And I'm done with the slides I'm going to present. So I'm going to open it wide open to any question you might have. I'll take a shot at answering it. So let's open it up for questions now. I think we've got a little bit of time left.
Well, our participants, we give some time for our participants to think about questions. I have one, Ken, and maybe that will spark some other questions. Of the 4 steps that you presented to us, in your experience, which one is the one that people tend to miss or find it more difficult to kind of meet or skip?
Yeah.
And why do you think that is?
It's definitely step 1 when you're setting the goals. If you look back at that goal setting exercise, coming at it from the standpoint of 3 different levels, you know, if you're trying to do a succession plan and you're not very high up in the organization, a lot of times you don't know what the business unit strategy is. Nobody's taken the time to talk to you about it. So it takes some work to do it. But if you do that, you personally become a better employee because you connect your own job to it. But you also connect any position you're looking to fill, you're connecting that position to the business unit level or to the corporate level. This first step is absolutely critical because it tees up everything after that.
Okay, so there's a couple more questions.
Okay.
One is, how long would you suggest this process should take?
Well, you know, if you happen to know what the business unit strategy is, and you happen to know the cultural initiatives, in a couple of days, you should be able to get through steps 1 through 3. you should be able to get to a point of understanding what it is you're looking for and what's the business case for it. You get, I mean, if not, a week, but it's not a week constant time. You're going to spend a little time on it, set it down, and go back to it later. But really apply your own critical thinking to doing this. The whole posting it and recruiting that last step, it adds a lot of time because, of course, now you got to get the job out there. You got to do interviews. You've got all that to happen. And, that could take weeks, days, weeks, or months, depending on how long it takes to find the right candidate. But the first 4 steps, you ought to be able to get through fairly quickly.
Okay, thank you. What type of business would you say would have difficulty using succession planning strategy?
What type of business do I think this would be tough to do in?
Right.
I'm name me a business that isn't replacing people. And that would be the answer. I'm hard pressed. If you're trying to do succession planning for yourself, for a position that reports to you, I'd be hard pressed to come up with a business where this process wouldn't apply. Even if you can't get to hard numbers, you should go through this verbally to understand what your verbal arguments are for the skill sets you're picking and help you understand what interview questions you really want to ask.
Okay, and one more question. How many people should be involved in a succession plan and who?
Yeah, great question. The hiring authority definitely has to be the final person to whom that position is going to report, definitely has to be involved in this process. Okay. I think HR should be involved in it, particularly when you get to what are called initiatives, because initiatives have certain directions, certain landmines, so to speak, that you have to be sure you're not creating a discriminatory process as you go through this. You don't want to do that. Okay, you want to be pretty aligned with you, not pretty, you want to be aligned with all of the employment law that's out there. Then beyond that, you could ask and solicit input from the individuals that are going to be interacting with the position you're trying to fill. Frequently, they have a perspective that will help clarify your thinking as you go through skill sets. They can't be the only inputs you get. You've got other inputs in terms of this process I've described, but it's good sometimes to just go 360 around the position and ask a couple of questions. Don't have them involved in every step, but ask some questions. Hey, we're going to fill this role. What do you think? Now, if you're doing it somewhat confidentially, that's tough to do, but you ought to try if you can.
There's a comment. I'm not sure there's a question there, but maybe you want to address the comment. Public entity may be difficult to plan ahead. For example, small water department, family business, if they can't agree.
Right. So getting agreement is always challenging. You got multiple people getting agreement. And I've always found that if you can start by going back to some indisputable statement, like the purpose statement of the department. In this case, we're applying the business unit strategy. That's set, and it's something that each position ought to try to support. In any department, you've got the purpose of the department, and you want the position to support the that purpose. Now, succession planning sometimes it's very restricted by who's got seniority. I understand that. But if you go through this process, you might identify what skill sets you really need, and might find out that the most senior person who's up for that position may not have the skill sets. So at least what you ought to do is go into it eyes wide open, and you ought to go into it with an identification of what training you really want that individual coming in to have, so that they do end up having the skills, do end up producing value, and do end up being successful. Because it's a tragedy to put somebody that doesn't have the skill set into a job they can't do.
One more question. How do you determine what metrics to use, and how do you calculate them?
Yeah, it's very much dependent upon the function that you're trying to look at. You know, if you're in sales, that's pretty obvious. Obvious. You want the salesman to sell, right? It's sales. If you're in customer service, you know, it might be, you know, we're all annoyed somewhat by these surveys that all these online customer service people ask us to take. But I think they're used. They are metrics that are used to help that customer service manager become better. So each function in an organization is going to have activities that it must do. And each activity or task has a good level of performance and a bad level of performance. Frequently, those can be expressed either verbally or in a more numeric fashion. So look at the activities in the function, draw out from those what's good and what's bad performance, what's good value or negative value.
And one more question is what resources we can refer to for help?
In this area?
I would assume so, yes. I think that's what the question means. Yes, I just got a yes.
Well, I mean, I'm going to throw myself out there, but I'm a SCORE volunteer. So call SCORE. If you got a succession plan you're working on, I'd be glad to help you. Free of charge, by the way. But if you're looking for research on succession planning, well, there's plenty of articles out there. In this presentation, I'm drawing primarily on my own experience in the area. And I tapped into some articles myself. But if you're looking for some guidance in a in a confidential way, I'd be glad to help. And Ed covered how to come to SCORE and find a mentor. You can come to SCORE and say, look, I attended the webinar. I'd like to have a conversation with Ken. We'll get you signed up as a client, and we can go from there.
I don't have any more questions. I don't know if there's anyone else that would like to post one last question.
Okay. Well, thanks, everybody. I really appreciate your time. I certainly hope this was effective for you all, and I certainly hope that we accomplished our learning goals today. So thank you.
Thanks, Ken.
Thanks,
Thank
Ed.
you, Claudia, for allowing us to be part of your class. We really appreciate it. And those of you that are still on, thank you very much.
Likewise, thank you everybody for joining us, and thanks to SCORE for visiting our class. We really appreciate it.
Okay, bye-bye.